Daniel is feeling down, as today is the day of his father's funeral. The employees of the funeral agency delivered the casket and brought it into the house. However, it turned out that they had mixed up the caskets and brought the wrong one. Apologizing, the agency's staff assured that they would fix everything. Daniel was puzzled. Jane, Daniel's wife, is getting ready for the upcoming funeral. When she learned from her husband about the funeral agency's mistake, Jane couldn't believe it. Apparently, no one considers the pain they inflict on the grieving family. Daniel is unhappy that all the responsibilities have fallen on his shoulders, including delivering the eulogy. His mother is grief-stricken, and his brother Robert, who is a writer living in New York, has never taken an interest in the family's life. Daniel has also written a novel, but he has not shown it to anyone yet. In the near future, the spouses plan to move and leave the past in the past. Howard and Justin are also heading to the funeral. Howard, a family friend, doesn't want to go because he can't stand that kind of thing, but he must pay his respects to late Edward. Justin, on the other hand, hardly knew Edward and is going there solely because he is in love with Martha. Martha, Daniel's cousin, and her fiancé Simon are also on their way to the funeral. Simon is worried because Martha's father hates him. Martha reassured the beloved, saying that her father hates everyone in general. Meanwhile, Daniel is rehearsing the eulogy. The hearse has arrived at the house again. Hopefully this time they haven't mixed anything up. At the request of Edward's relatives, Howard and Justin were supposed to pick up Uncle Alfie. After checking the casket, Daniel and Jane made sure that this time the funeral agency employees did everything correctly. Daniel's mother, Sandra, doesn't know how to live without her beloved husband now. The son reminded her that she has family and faithful friends. Troy, Martha's brother, who is studying to be a pharmacologist, is dealing in illegal substances. Hearing a knock at the door, he quickly placed the pills in a Valium bottle. Martha and Simon picked up Troy, who wasn't ready yet. Simon is very nervous. Seeing the Valium bottle, Martha gave her fiancé a pill. Troy didn't notice. Finally, Robert, Daniel's brother, arrived. He boasted about flying business class. However, Robert did not help Daniel with the funeral arrangements in any way. Howard and Justin went to pick up Uncle Alfie, who has a disability and a very unpleasant character. Daniel told the brother that he and his wife were going to be moving. They recently put a deposit on a house, so Daniel needs money now and wants Robert to cover half of the funeral expenses. Robert admitted that he spent his last money on a business class ticket. He positions himself as a successful writer and lives in a luxurious penthouse, but all the money is spent on maintaining this house. Simon began to behave erratically. Martha thought it was due to stress. Martha took Howard's parking spot, causing him great inconvenience. She finds Justin's presence here inappropriate since he's neither a relative nor a family friend. He attempted to flirt with her, but Martha simply walked past him. Simon's behavior is becoming increasingly strange, and Martha couldn't help but notice. She shared with her brother that perhaps it's an unconventional reaction to Valium. Upon hearing this, Troy became nervous but didn't show it. Uncle Alfie grumbled and nitpicked at Howard, who was trying to park, about anything. In the house where guests had already begun to gather, the brothers noticed a dwarf. None of them are acquainted with him. Daniel has realized that he will have to cover the funeral expenses alone. Their conversation was interrupted by the Reverend, who began to admire Robert's writing talent. He clearly enjoyed the attention. The Reverend offered Robert to deliver the eulogy, but Robert said his brother would do it. Victor, Martha and Troy's father, supports his sister who lost her husband. Jane reminded Daniel about the need to bail out the house. In reality, they haven't done it yet. Daniel promised that he would take care of everything. That dwarf keeps his eyes on him. Daniel wonders who he is. Howard is forced to fend for Uncle Alfie, who can only move around in a wheelchair. Meanwhile, Daniel is rehearsing the eulogy. Suddenly he is approached by the dwarf, who introduces himself as Peter. Daniel couldn't recall his father ever mentioning Peter, which surprised him greatly. Howard is forced to endure insults from Uncle Alfie directed at him. The Reverend told Daniel that it's time to start the service. Daniel asked for another 5 minutes because it wouldn't be right to begin without Uncle Alfie. Simon's behavior is becoming increasingly uncontrollable. Troy realizes that he should tell Martha the truth. Victor is surprised that Daniel, not Robert, will be delivering the speech. Of course, Daniel doesn't appreciate this disregard, as he is the one paying for the funeral. Victor barely notices it, admiring Robert's success. Jane supports her husband, saying that he should give the speech, despite everything. Troy confessed to Martha that the bottle didn't contain Valium but a hallucinogenic mixture. At that moment, Martha barely held back from hitting her brother. Now all they can do is keep a close eye on Simon and not let him engage in lengthy conversations with anyone. However, it's not as simple as it sounds. When Simon approached to greet the bride's family members, he began displaying inappropriate behavior, causing Victor's displeasure. Martha doesn't know what to do. She can't leave with Simon right now because Aunt Sandra won't forgive her for it. While Troy and Martha were keeping a close watch on Simon, Justin tried to flirt with her, which only irritated Martha even more. Simon fell asleep standing up, but woke up after a minute. Finally Howard brought Uncle Alfie, who kept on cursing. Peter asked Daniel for a private conversation again, but he's busy for now. It looked as if all the responsibilities with Uncle Alfie were taken on by Justin, not Howard. In that moment he experienced the injustice of the world. The Reverend was preparing to begin the funeral service, while Martha was trying to control Simon. The effects of the substance had clouded his judgment. Everyone present took their seats. Howard whispered his frustration to Justin about leaving him alone with Uncle Alfie. Howard also didn't appreciate Martha's dismissive attitude. It seemed like she didn't appreciate what he had done for them. Daniel asked Howard to behave properly. After all, they were at a funeral. Simon was experiencing hallucinations, so Martha kept a close watch on him. It was time to deliver the eulogy. Daniel thanked everyone who had come here today. Simon burst into loud laughter. Daniel was very nervous and read the speech from a piece of paper. He started recounting the entire father's biography from scratch, going into unnecessary details, which left everyone puzzled. Simon began to feel like the casket was moving. He could no longer control himself and began to be noisy. When Simon overturned the casket, Sandra went into hysterics. There was a commotion. Daniel, who was trying to resolve everything, demanded an explanation from Martha. She promised to explain everything later. Victor was furious and ordered the daughter to break up with Simon. Martha replied that she had no intention of doing that and explained that his behavior was an unconventional reaction to Valium. Troy is very afraid that his sister will turn him in. After calming down, Victor suggested discussing it later. Howard is concerned about a strange spot on his skin that appeared 3 months ago. Daniel advised him to consult Victor, who is a doctor. Martha tried to explain to her beloved that he had not taken Valium, but something else. Victor brushed off Howard, suggesting he see a dermatologist. Perhaps it's some mutation or an allergic reaction to nuts. Realizing what had happened, Simon lunged at Troy, causing the bottle of pills to fall out. Justin watched them from the window. Suddenly Simon felt nauseous and rushed to the bathroom, locking himself in. Martha knocked on the door, asking him to let her in. Troy discovered that the bottle was missing. Simon tried to compose himself. The medication lasts for at least 8 hours, so there was a long wait ahead. Peter asked Daniel for a private conversation again, while Troy searched for the pseudo-Valium. In a separate room, Peter showed Daniel pictures of himself with Edward. According to Peter, they met on the street and had become very close lately. Simon lost control of himself again. Daniel found it strange that his father had never mentioned Peter. At some point, Daniel realized that his father and Peter had a romantic relationship. Daniel didn't want to believe it. If the mother found out, she wouldn't be able to handle it. In exchange for his silence, Peter wants £15,000. Peter feels it's unfair that Edward left him nothing. This makes Peter feel cheap. Daniel stated that these photos didn't prove anything. So Peter showed a more explicit photo. Telling Peter to wait here, Daniel tried to figure out how to get out of this situation, while the guests approached him and offered condolences. Martha is still trying to convince Simon to come out. Justin approached her and started flirting, but Martha made it clear that she didn't want to talk to him. Daniel took his brother to the garage and told him about the blackmail and everything else. Robert can't believe that their father had a non-standard orientation and deceived their mother all these years. The brothers need to take urgent action to prevent the truth from coming out. Justin doesn't understand why he's even here if Martha isn't paying any attention to him. Howard is becoming paranoid about the spot on his skin. What if there are almonds in the pastries prepared for the wake? Victor holds Sandra's hand. She's having a really hard time with all of this. Howard approached the doctor again, but he just walked past. Then Howard sat down next to Sandra and said that losing a husband is a terrible event, but she's still relatively young and can remarry. As if casually, Howard asked if there were almonds in those pastries, after which Sandra left. Seeing the bottle of Valium on the lawn, Howard picked it up. Robert doesn't have any money, so he can't pay the blackmailer. Daniel has the money, but he can't take it because he needs it for the down payment on the house. Martha unsuccessfully tries to convince her fiancé to come out while Troy searches everywhere for the bottle. Jane asked her husband what was happening, to which he only replied that they would have to postpone the house purchase and promise to explain everything later. While Peter was waiting, he read a draft of Daniel's novel. Who didn't like this? Daniel agreed to write Peter a check on the condition that he would immediately destroy the photos and disappear from their lives forever. When Peter started praising Robert's books and his writing talent in comparison to Daniel, the latter couldn't take it anymore and tore up the check. He is no longer willing to tolerate such treatment and has no intention of paying Peter, even if he reveals their father's secret to everyone. Robert realized that his brother was not going to save their father's reputation. That is his concern now. Robert didn't let Peter leave the room and grabbed him, telling his brother to find some rope. Flustered Daniel did it. All the guests heard strange sounds coming from Daniel's room. Meanwhile, Simon climbed out of the window onto the roof. His clothes were left in the bathroom. While Martha and Jane complained to each other about men, Howard entered Daniel's room and witnessed a very strange sight. The brothers lied about Peter having a seizure. Howard suggested giving him Valium. The brothers thought it was a good idea and told Howard to give not just one pill, but several. Troy entered and immediately understood that they were holding Peter not because he had a seizure. While Simon was on the roof under the influence of the substance, Troy learned that Peter had been given Valium, which was not actually Valium. Troy had to tell the truth to all the participants in this story. Someone suggested calling an ambulance, but the others didn't think it was a good idea. After gastric lavage, doctors would definitely find out what Peter had actually consumed. Now they definitely couldn't let him go because in that case, they would all end up in prison. Sandra knocked on the door, asking her sons if everything was okay. After telling Troy and Howard to watch over Peter, the brothers went out to join the others. The Reverend can only be here until 3 o'clock, so they need to continue the service. Justin is very upset about Martha's rejection. Uncle Alfie said he needed to use the restroom. Howard and Troy are trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. Considering that there were 5 pills, there is a possibility that Peter might not survive it. Suddenly Uncle Alfie knocked and said in an irritated voice that he needed to use the bathroom. Howard and Troy hastily hit immobilized Peter and opened the door for Uncle Alfie. Justin approached Martha again and reminded her of what had happened between them. Martha said it was a mistake. She is currently dating Simon, whom she loves. Jane demanded an explanation from her husband. The brothers had no choice but to tell her the truth. At first Jane thought it was a joke, but it quickly became obvious that it wasn't. Howard tried to help Uncle Alfie use the toilet, but it was too late. Howard got soiled and started to panic. Troy got distracted and left Peter unattended. Peter woke up while Howard was frantically washing his hands. Troy told him that his face was dirty too. Howard was on the verge of hysteria. Meanwhile, Peter managed to stand up and started dancing, but then suddenly fell and hit. Howard and Troy panicked, thinking that Peter had passed away. He showed no signs of life. Checking his pulse, Troy realized that Peter had indeed passed away. This is very bad. Jane told her husband and Robert to just give Peter the money, but she doesn't know all the details yet. Howard came out of Daniel's room, and trying to keep himself together approached the brothers, asking them to go with him. Telling his wife to wait here, Daniel went with Howard, as did Robert. They found themselves in a terrible situation. It seems that Peter fell and hit the table. Robert suggested simply getting rid of the evidence, as no one here knows this guy. Troy came up with a brilliant idea. They could bury Peter together with Edward. No one would ever think to look for Peter there. Daniel couldn't allow that, but Robert thought it was a good idea. In the end Daniel had to admit that it was the best way out of the situation. Justin confessed his love to Martha and kissed her. Simon, who was on the roof the whole time, saw it through the window. Seeing Simon, Martha opened the window and tried to persuade him to come back inside, but Simon threatened to jump. Of course this attracted the attention of the guests downstairs. Justin wanted to tell Howard about this and knocked on Daniel's room. The guys were going to hide lifeless Peter in the bathroom, but they didn't take into account that Uncle Alfie, who'd dozed off, was still in there. They had to open the door for Justin and cover Peter. Hearing about what Simon was doing, Troy rushed there. Everyone downstairs gathered, trying to persuade Simon not to take this rash step. But he didn't listen to anyone, climbing on the roof. Martha followed him. Daniel told his wife that they had found a way to get rid of the blackmailer and asked her not to let anyone into the house for now. Taking advantage of this, the guys moved Peter. Somehow the Reverend entered the house. Howard was doing his best to distract him while the guys did what they had to do. Nervously, Robert joked that their father would have wanted this if he had truly loved Peter. Daniel accused Robert, who had never cared about anyone but himself, of being selfish. While Howard continued to distract the Reverend, the people outside were watching Simon and Martha. Justin was having fun, unlike Troy. Martha confessed to Simon that she was pregnant. Of course everyone heard it and started congratulating Martha. Simon began to calm down. At that moment, Troy felt an incredible relief. Hearing the people outside applauding, the Reverend hurried there. Everyone was happy except Victor, who believed Simon was unworthy of his daughter. Later, Daniel told his wife that everything was sorted out. Meanwhile, Victor told his daughter that pregnancy didn't obligate her to marry Simon. However, Martha, determined, declared her love for Simon and her intention to marry him. The guys only now remembered that they had left Uncle Alfie in the bathroom. Troy discovered that the bottle of Valium was missing again. An outraged Uncle Alfie asked whose body it was. The guys told him he had just fallen asleep and had a dream. Justin regrets his persistence. If he had known about Martha's pregnancy in advance, he wouldn't have flirted with her. Howard is no longer concerned about all of this, including the spot on his skin. It's nothing compared to what he's been through. Uncle Alfie tells everyone about the body, but of course no one believes him, attributing it to dementia. Daniel asked the Reverend not to open the casket again. The Reverend hastily finished the service and gave Daniel the floor. He was about to finish his eulogy when suddenly knocks came from the casket. It was obvious that Peter was actually alive. The guys panicked, and the guests were bewildered. When Peter burst out, everyone screamed. Robert, pretending not to know, accused Peter of sacrilege and hurried to drag him away. At that moment, the provocative photos fell out of Peter's pocket, which Sandra saw and was furious. Victor was no less shocked. Daniel began to speak louder, attracting everyone's attention. He finished his speech, but now he was speaking from the heart, not reading from a piece of paper. Everyone was deeply moved. Finally it was all over. The brothers had a heart-to-heart talk. Robert told Daniel that he had invited their mother to live with him in New York. For Daniel and Jane, this would be a great opportunity to sort out their issues. Robert also expressed admiration for the brothers' speech. Daniel thanked him and asked if he would have time to read his novel. Robert replied that he would be happy to do so. Jane joined them and said that Uncle Alfie kept talking nonsense about the body. She found the Valium and gave him 2 tablets. The brothers did not expect such a turn of events. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel not to miss more exciting new products. Also, the authors will be pleased if you leave your opinion in the comments.